You know, when we talk about API security, our minds almost always jump to protecting the live services we're using right now. But what about the ones we've left behind? Today, we're digging into API decommissioning, and let me tell you, it's not just about tidying up. It's an absolutely critical security procedure.
It's a pretty straightforward question, right? But the answer? Well, that's where things get interesting. You build an API, it does its job for a while, and then, inevitably, it gets replaced or just becomes obsolete. So what actually happens to that old code, that forgotten endpoint, just sitting out there?
Well, it can become what some people call a zombie API, basically a ghost in your machine. It's not being maintained, nobody's monitoring it, but it's often still plugged into your systems. Think of it like an abandoned building. If you don't demolish it properly and safely, it becomes a huge hazard for the whole neighborhood. So today, we're going to learn how to do that demolition the right way. We're going to break this whole thing down into a super clear 3-step process. First, we'll talk about creating a master plan. Then, we'll dive into why clear communication is key. And finally, we'll walk through the actual shutdown itself. All right, step 1 is all about having a master plan. Just like with that abandoned building we talked about, you don't just roll up with a wrecking ball and hope for the best. You need a blueprint for the demolition to prevent total chaos and, make sure you don't accidentally knock down the building next door. And this planning phase isn't just one giant to-do item. It really breaks down into 3 key parts. You've got to figure out exactly what needs to go, decide what you're going to do with all its data, and then set a really clear timeline that everyone can stick to. Let's kick off with that first point, identification. It is so important to know precisely which services, which endpoints, and which components are being retired. And this isn't just for your team's benefit. This kind of clarity is the foundation for explaining the project's scope to every single person involved. Next up, and this is a big one, what do you do with all the data that API was handling? This is a massive security decision. Are you going to migrate it to a new system? Do you need to securely erase it? Or maybe you have to archive it for compliance reasons. Making this call early is absolutely essential because it directly ties into security and helps you avoid data leaks or accidental loss later on. So once you know what's on the chopping block and how you're handling the data, you need a timeline. A detailed timeline is your best friend for cutting down on miscommunication. It makes sure every team knows what they're responsible for, which helps you dodge those delays and budget problems that can totally derail a project. So, with your blueprint ready to go, we can move on to phase 2, clear communication. Or, as I like to call it, notifying the neighborhood. This part is all about the people, making sure nobody is caught off guard when the lights finally go out. There are basically 3 key groups you have to loop in. First, your users. They need a heads up to avoid a terrible experience. Then, any third-party companies, so they can handle contracts and remove integrations. And of course, your own developers need to be in the know to prevent any internal mix-ups and errors. And what exactly do you tell them? The key here is to be consistent and crystal clear. Everyone involved needs to know the timeline, what they should use as an alternative, any specific actions they have to take, and where they can find updates. This is definitely not a time to be vague. It's a time to over-communicate. And that brings us to the final act, the shutdown itself. The plans are all laid out, everyone's been told what's happening, and now it's time to execute. This is where we safely and securely put that old API to rest for good. The final shutdown has 3 very clear technical steps. First, you terminate the services. Second, you retire the infrastructure it was running on. And third, a step that, believe me, gets missed all the time, you review all the related network configurations. So why is retiring that infrastructure such a big deal? Well, there are 2 huge reasons. First, it costs money to keep unused servers spinning. But even more importantly, that leftover infrastructure is a massive security risk. It creates a bigger attack surface for hackers, and if it's holding any personal data, you could be in for some major compliance headaches. This brings us to a really specific and nasty threat that you've got to be aware of: subdomain takeover. This happens when you shut down a service, but forget to delete the DNS record that points to it. An attacker can then just come along, claim that now empty service, and effectively hijack your subdomain. It's a surprisingly common and incredibly dangerous mistake. And that is exactly why that final network review is absolutely non-negotiable. You have to comb through everything, pull down those unnecessary DNS records, delete any subdomains that are referenced, and get rid of those CNAME records pointing to nothing. A forgotten network setting is basically like leaving a side door wide open for an attacker. All right, so let's wrap this all up. What's the big takeaway here? A secure digital exit isn't just about hitting delete on some code. It's a complete strategy with a clear beginning, middle, and end. The whole process really boils down to this simple idea. You plan ahead to prevent chaos. You communicate with everyone to prevent surprises, and you execute securely to prevent vulnerabilities. It's a straightforward but really powerful framework you can use for retiring any API. So I'm going to leave you with this one question to chew on. What about the old APIs in your organization? Are they truly gone, safely demolished? Or are they the ghosts in your machine, forgotten but not gone, just waiting for the right moment to become your next